want to start working on. And so we're going to start. So let me read Spade's bio, and then we'll start. Spade Robinson is the founder and owner of Atlanta Film Project, formerly Story Consulting Services, a full service consulting firm for storytellers in film and television. Spade began curating scripts, films, and work in progress projects during her time at Sundance Institute, where she worked with the feature film program, documentary film program, and Sundance Film Festival. During that time, she worked with hundreds of filmmakers to develop the most compelling versions of their stories. Underneath Rod Taylor of the DFP, she created a series of workshops to cultivate emerging filmmakers, building a pipeline into the funding opportunities there. Outside of Sundance, Spade began consulting with Women in Film, HBO, and the Blacklist to support emerging voices through their programs. In 2015, Spade founded Story Consulting Services, supporting both individual storytellers in development as well as companies cultivating talent. Corporate clients have included Sundance Institute, Film Independent, LA Film Festival, HBO, Fox Studios, Adoptive Studios, and Disney. In 2019, Atlanta Film Project hosted its first residential lab for screenwriters in Los Angeles as a part of a new initiative of live events and services. Spain lives in LA, where Atlanta Film Project is based. Thank you, Spade, and it's all yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you guys so much for having me. I've worked with a few of you and I see a few familiar faces, and I recognize a couple of films that we've talked about a little bit over the years. So I want to jump right in. I think what's going to be different about tonight is I like it to be a little more interactive than before. We're going to talk about how to tell the most compelling version of your story. As you know, I'm a firm believer that all of that is sort of rooted in genre. What is the genre of your documentary? And then based on that genre, what is the approach you're going to use? So tonight, we're going to talk about what is the storytelling approach, what's the storytelling function you should use, but then based on the genre that you choose, the genre that your film lives in, what is the visual approach that you should be using to tell the most compelling version of your stories cinematically and thematically. So the way it's going to work is that I'm going to sort of go over a section, and I think it's usually most helpful if there are questions about that section to sort of answer them kind of live as opposed to like waiting and you sort of have lost the context of what
Right, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
and then of course there's going to be time at the end to answer direct questions for your film. So during the meat of it, we're going to be discussing sort of what these concepts mean. And then toward the end, I'd like to talk to you individually if you have questions about how to apply them to your project. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Oh,
is it working?
it's not.
Okay, I thought I had it so that you could. Oh, wait a second. Let me do this. Let me just change that. And because I put it so that multiple people can share simultaneously. Okay, can you try again?
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Right, here we are. Okay, so I believe that some of you have seen this before. Is it working for you?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure you guys are. I hope you guys are. So do you see documentary genre?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So most of you have seen this before. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is what all documentaries need, no matter what the approach is. or what the genre is, and then we'll go into genre specifically. So all documentaries need a compelling story, and the way that I define that is a beginning, middle, shift, and then end. That is your story arc, is that shift that happens. That's that classic 3-act structure. And of course, you can bend it, shape it, mold it, but you always want to feel as though you were changed by watching the film and someone in the film has changed, either one. You want an additive lens. And this is very, very important for a documentary. What are you adding to the conversation around the subject matter? A lot of times for documentary, you'll hear what it's about in terms of a topic, right? But the difference between a topic and a story is that, of course, there's that beginning, middle, and end. And a topic, inside of that topic, it's rare to find a topic in documentary that there's not already a film about, or there's not already a common knowledge or understanding. Even if it's deeply compelling, even if it's deeply personal, even if the stakes are very high, the question is, what is the filmmaker's lens on that topic, shifting the conversation that's happening in the zeitgeist? Perspective, why are you the best person to tell this story? That is one of those sort of eye roll questions, like, what do you mean? Why am I, this is my actual father. What do you mean? You know? But I think when we're looking at proposals for funding and stuff like that, we don't really take advantage of answering that question in a way that can benefit us for the storytelling process. And you really do have to ask yourself, why are you the best person to tell the story? And it's not always about the proximity to the topic or the proximity to the character. That can be why you have access to the story. But you're the best person to tell the story because your lens, your viewpoint, your perspective, in terms of the way you see the world, will be additive to the conversation that's already happening about this topic. The stakes, how many people outside the characters of the film are affected? With documentary, unfortunately, especially because so many stories are past focused, then the stakes, you know, sort of the tendency is for the stakes to be low. So when you're talking about something that's already happened, when it happened, the stakes were high. If your story takes place in the middle of a war, it was very high stakes. It was life and death when it happened. But today, when the war is not happening and you're telling the story of something that already happened, then the stakes are extremely low. And so you have to figure out how the current telling of this story makes the stakes high. And then compelling characters, person, place, group, etc., that embody the best way to tell the story. And compelling characters are sometimes hard to find, especially when you have a personal relationship with them, because of course your auntie is compelling to you. But what you do have to realize is that a character is not necessarily a person. And sometimes when you have a character who is a person, and you are not able to find that compelling performance that you want out of them because they've told the story a million times and you've heard it from them a million times, and you're not finding that sort of emotional viewing experience of watching them on screen, you may want to choose a different character. And that's not to say that you're not following this person, but maybe the character you're really following is the movement or the city or the idea that can have higher stakes or more of a story arc than that person who kind of hasn't changed in 20 years. So those are the things that all documentaries need if they're going to be compelling, no matter what genre they're in. A lot of people, when they think about genre in film, it's action or documentary, and documentary sort of gets lumped into one genre, but there are different genres in documentary. And different genres prioritize how important storytelling elements will be crafted in each picture. However, regardless, the following are always true. You want to know if the story is layered and compelling. So are the stakes high? And is there a sort of onion around the topic, right? So we talked about a topic is not the same thing as a story. Topic is the world that your story lives in. And a story is that beginning, middle, shift, end. And that story, that beginning, middle, shift, end, can take place in any world. So if your film takes place in the world of prostitution in Uzbekistan, and my film takes place in the middle of this couple who's on the brink of divorce, and your film is about a chess tournament, the same story can happen in each of those worlds. So really, we want to make sure, I'm probably going to say this 12 times tonight, we want to make sure not to confuse context, which is your topic, with the story. And so the story has to be layered and compelling, not the world of the project, right? Not the world of the movie. And so that beginning, middle, shift, end, the way that you layer that, we'll go, I think, into more detail when we talk about your specific projects. But the way that you layer that is you make sure that there is the beginning, middle, shift in of the big story. And then there's the beginning, middle, shift in of a thread that you may have that can be under that. So one of my favorite documentaries takes place in this rest home where these, these two elderly people are falling in love. And it's very sweet and it's very quiet, meditative film. And so there's the world of this place and what is it like? It's activity night and, there's a little thread of a story that has to do with the food, right? And so it's like everybody loves steak night, but it only happens once every blue moon and the food is terrible. And so while we're watching the film, we're like waiting for steak night to come. And then every time they go into the cafeteria, it's like this like mini disappointment, right? That's one like tiny ribbon of story. And then there's the main story. There's these two people falling in love. And then those are the nurses who are going home late at night because they care so much about their job and figuring out if they're getting too attached and realizing that people don't come see their loved ones, right? So there's all these threads happening. That's how you make sure it's layered. Is the story inherently visual? How can I be additive here? So every documentary is not going to change the visual landscape of documentary, but it is a conversation you need to be having with yourself or your team about the visual language of your movie. Documentary is an inherently visual art form, and gone are the days when you can just rely heavily on whatever the story is and whatever the world of the movie is, and for good reason. This is the art form, and you have to be thinking as artists. Question is, how can I be additive here? You may not reinvent the wheel of visual storytelling techniques for documentary, but you want to experiment, you want to try, you want to play, you want to allow your inner director and inner filmmaker to really shine alongside of whatever story you're telling. Because without that, you could have written an article. You know what I mean? The question you always want to ask yourself is, the story I'm telling inherently visual? Does this deserve and or need to be a documentary? Or can I write some essays about it? Is it a photo series? Is this story a documentary? And if you got to the point where you decided it is, it's because your story is inherently visual. Whether you have found some incredible archival or you have a plan of how you're going to shoot it, that is a thread that you want to be thinking in. And then the mission, how significant and or urgent is the subject matter? I mean, that's a question to ask yourself at the very beginning, but throughout the project, you want to continue to ask yourself about the urgency of the project. So urgency can be a controversial word in documentary because it's a word that a lot of documentary filmmakers use to make sure they get funding, right? It's something that I hear a lot of documentary filmmakers say it's something that's urgent on the global landscape, which means this is a once in a lifetime thing that's happening. It'll never happen again. If I don't go to wherever, Jordan, to shoot this right now, it'll never be shot. Give me $50,000. Makes sense to me. But for those of us who are making films that don't exist and it's never going to happen again landscape, you still have to ask yourself, why is it urgent to make it right now? And it may not be because it's event based. It may be because, or someone is going to pass away or something like that. But it has to be your perspective that makes something urgent. This is the reason why this story has to be told right now. And that goes back to, why am I the person to tell the story? And that's perspective based. And what lens am I bringing to the story that makes it urgent to tell right now? Who are you as a person, or what have you learned about being alive that you bring to the way that you see the world and the way you're going to see this project that now makes it urgent? I hope that makes sense. I hope I was really clear about that. But it's really important to not just tell a story, but to give it the relevance that is contemporary. Even if you're telling a past story, even if it happened a million years ago, even if all your footage is archival and there's nothing new that you're shooting, there's a perspective that has to do with the fact that you're alive right now that will make your story urgent to tell in this time, for such a time as this. So before we get into the different genres, I'm just gonna pause and see if there's any questions about those things. And these things apply to every documentary that you're making, every documentary that is being made should have these elements. So when it comes to the different genres in our approach, there's the sort of thematic approach, right? With, okay, I need access, is how I'm gonna tell the story, is make sure that, you know, that there's the discovery happening. I'm dropping along, I think there was Hansel and Gretel, right? With
the crab with the breadcrumb.
The crumbs, right, exactly.
Breadcrumbs.
And so, okay, so then, you know, what do I see when I'm watching the movie? Not what do I experience and sort of feel in here. And for a survey documentary, the most important thing is going to be performance. So you have this high level of access, right? But it sounds a little bit weird to say performance in documentary, and it definitely sounds weird to say performance in a survey documentary, which isn't people sort of living their lives, right? But it is very important to have that expressiveness, and not necessarily like I'm being expressive, but in terms of emotional, in terms of, you know, the face muscles and the surprise and the silences that build your performance to make these compelling interviews to watch. Because it's not a podcast, right? And so it has to be compelling to look at. And you can build a great performance as a director. A lot of that has to do with, you know, the questions you ask and how you position in the order you ask them in. But what you're looking for is this compelling performance. And so that is the most important thing visually. In a survey doc, we can go into how to build that at some point. But that should be on the forefront of your mind. For a verite doc, I would say suspense / reward, which we talked about, discovery, and you're building that suspense. But you want to build your scenes visually in a way where I feel as though I'm seeking a reward by watching what you've created. So if there's a scene, you know, we had that scene, the married couple who's on the brink of divorce, right? When I watch a verite scene that you built, I want to be watching, is he gonna say it? Is she gonna say it? Who gonna say it? And so a scene with two people having dinner should just be fraught with suspense, and then I should be rewarded for watching it. That means that the way you set up the camera should be a way that I can see things that build suspense. It should be set up in a way where I can experience subtlety. You should be planning out what things do build suspense. That's something you should be studying. And then I should be rewarded for sitting through the scene of nothing happening. And that is, it's a lot of money and time and effort to just go shoot your character. You know, you go and you're like, oh, I found this perfect person. I'm just gonna go shoot them. And you know, someone like me would ask, okay, what are you shooting? Well, they're gonna walk their dogs today, and I think that's important because they love dogs, and you know, I mean, that's just, I don't know. I think that it's how we get stuck. And then we have so much footage that then we have to figure out how to make a movie out of. But if you have someone who is looking for love and they are hoping to meet somebody at the dog park because they heard it, two things. First of all, you need to get that soundbite and get them on camera saying that that's what they hope for. And then you build a scene around the beginning, middle, and end of what that would look like, the end being a payoff. And the payoff doesn't mean that they have to meet someone. It can be a disappointment. They couldn't meet anybody. But what I tell my clients all the time is it's like a shoe drop, right? So if you drop the first shoe, you have to drop the second one, plant and payoff. And so that's the most important thing you want with the verite documentary is plant and payoff. Historical doc, richness of archival. I don't think that's a correct sentence, but I didn't want to use wealth of archival because I think there's the idea that with wealth of archival, we're thinking about volume. There's so much archival I found. What makes archival rich is that it looks cool. It looks good. It's not grainy and weird and nothing is happening. It is pretty to look at, and if it's not pretty to look at, something is definitely happening, or you have access to something nobody's ever seen before. And it is enough to tell a story. It doesn't have to be the story of what was happening when it was shot, but you as a filmmaker who's telling a story, you manipulate it in a way where it's telling a story that you're telling, and you have the archival to prove it. So it makes it rich. And then for social issue documentary is visual assimilation. So for a lot of social issue documentaries, you are using all these approaches. You have a little verite footage at the march. You have some sit down interviews of, this, pastor who's talking about back in my day, whatever. And then, you have the social worker who's, got the 15 kids or whatever. Okay. So then you have a chart, right? Welfare has gone up and come down and the dollar is decreasing and these many people have died from this thing. So how do you make all of that work together? Well, the magic is going to be for there to be a seamless visual style that marry all of these things.
Yep.
For a social issue documentary, it is so tempting to rely on the shock of the fact that the world is a terrible place. But that is not good enough because you're making art. And so you have to first start with what you have in the can, which is, for example, if you have social issue documentary that is about something that you already have the archival for, then you may want to bridge out from there. Or if it's something more traditional, then the colors, the style of your graphics, you may want to build out from there. But they do need to be married, and they need to speak to each other. And one sort of tidbit for that is going to be sound. Sometimes it's difficult to marry a lot of elements, especially in something like a social issue documentary. But if you can make the scenes speak to each other with sound, meaning if there's archival of Martin Luther King saying something we never heard him say about, I was gonna kill him, right? And then you have a chart, and the chart is showing how violence against African Americans birthed violence from African American to African American. I don't know, right? That's what your movie's about. You're proving Black on Black violence is a myth, which it is, but right? So great. And Martin Luther King, nobody knew it, but he and his homeboy used to fist fight all the time. And the more he got beat, the more him and his homeboy used to fist fight. Okay, so that's the chart you're gonna show. Well, you using sound to bridge that, this super rich archival of Martin Luther King doing like this, rocking back and forth, being like, right? And then you hear in the next slide, I'm gonna kill him. And then it's going up. I mean, you have to find a way to marry those things. And so sound is a way to do that. It doesn't have to be like, you know, dialogue or sound bites. There can be the tapestry of how you put together your soundscape, whether it's footsteps or rain or something that makes these things feel like they're a part of each other. And visually you want to do that too. And it doesn't always have to be graphics of making something that's not grainy look grainy. That's weird. But it is, for example, if you have this black and white archival that's gorgeous, but there's no way you can get it in color, you may do some scene design in the next scene. So you have your main character, and this is the character, you know, the couple that are thinking about a divorce. And you have this archival from, you know, when their grandparents got married, great grandparents, people who are very old. And it's in black and white, and it's silent. You can't hear anything, but you play this soundbite of a VHS recorder rewinding, and you play the footage. You play the rerounding song. I mean, the rerounding sound. You play the footage again, rewound, and then you stop on the grandmother's face, and you see how happy she looks, and then you hear the main character saying, even when I think about when I got engaged or my marriage or my wedding day, I've never been as happy as grandma looks. And then we go to the next scene, and she's in this, her bedroom that's all white, that you changed out her bedspread for. And she's sitting in this chair, and she's in black clothes that you told her to wear. And it's shadowy and it looks black and white, but it's live. And you created a scene that fits with the scene we just watched. So, of course, that's not a social issue documentary, but you can do that with, you know, some footage of people marching, and it's in black and white. And then you have this person who's a therapist, and her only clients are people who are activists, and she gave her life to do that. Put her in a bedroom with some white sheets and whatever else. You have to put your hand on the movie in such a way that it becomes art. For documentary, we just like, don't think about set design, don't think about costume design, don't think about sound design, and we just let it happen. But you all are artists, and you want your film to represent that when people watch it.
So gone are the days of, oh, I'm just, like you said, let it happen and you don't, but which I'm hearing now, which again, like Tiffany, I'm going, just like this buzzing. There's got to be times that you set up your stuff, that you plan it, for it to look like this and for it to be like this, as opposed to letting just like, well, we'll get there and we don't know what, but you're saying make your piece to be compelling, make it as artistic as possible. And that may be, like you saying, setting up your how the room looks or what people are wearing or how they're seated or what's happening and all those things. So all that stuff is well thought out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And just as a tiny tidbit, every interview does not have to be set up like a CNN interview.
Right.
If you want to hear something that somebody has to say, um, it could be that you do that, and that is the look of your movie. But if that's not the look of your movie, if you're making a verite film, but there's some things that you missed and you need them to say, so you need to sit them down for an interview. People always say, put them in the kitchen, make them cook. I'm over that. Yes, that could work, but oftentimes you don't really get to see their face. People don't really let themselves get emotional while they're cooking. You may just want to, because like have them do something. I think yes, if it's related, it usually helps with two people having a conversation to break the ice. But if it's just one person, maybe you put them in a window and silhouette them and light them 3/4. And then as opposed to asking them, tell me about the day your grandfather died, go. They probably thought about this. They knew you were going to talk about it. That's what the movie's about. They probably already told you about it. First of all, never ask people about those important questions, like just talking to them or when you first start filming. Something that you need them to tell you for the first time, it should always be on camera. Because they're going to give you, I've already told you this, eyes, and then tell a story very monotone. But you want to take a few steps back so they forget they're answering the question. This is the interview technique, it has nothing to do with visual, but since we're here. So like one time I was asking this woman who had been Miss Ghana or something. She was a beauty queen. I forgot what category she won. And so she had been interviewed a bunch of times over. Tell us about how it felt. Tell us about how it felt. Tell us about how it felt. And I knew she was going to give me one of those, well, answers. And so the question I asked her was, when your name was called, where on the stage were you? And then she had to answer the question in a way that took her back to that place. And that's how you start a scene. I was almost at the end and I thought that nobody could see me. And I hope they didn't call me because I had been working so hard, and you know what I mean? Take them through, and then what happened next? What did you see? What did it smell like? And then that's that experience that takes somebody back to a place. Anyway, but for the sake of this conversation, those are the 4 most important things that I think that you need to concentrate on based on what type of documentary you're making.